On a lonely stretch of Route 66, a group of bikers stops for an old veteran stranded beside his broken truck, none of them realizing a quiet stranger has joined their ranks. Moments later, an act of silent generosity will change every life on that road and reveal a secret they'll never forget. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The sun was melting into the horizon, staining the sky with streaks of orange and red as it sank behind the desert hills. The only sound breaking the quiet of the vast highway was the deep, rhythmic growl of motorcycle engines cutting through the wind. A pack of 6 bikers thundered down Route 66, their leather jackets flashing the faded emblem of the Iron Hawks. Dust trailed behind them like a ghost of the past they were all trying to outrun. At the front rode Ryder Cole, their leader. His beard was flecked with gray, his knuckles scarred from fights he didn't talk about anymore. Life had toughened him, but something in his eyes still held decency, a glimmer of the man he once was before the road became his only home. They were heading west, no destination in mind. Just the road, the roar of engines, and the kind of silence only freedom can give. But as the sun lowered, Ryder spotted something ahead, a faint plume of smoke rising from the shoulder of the road. "Hold up!" he shouted through his helmet. His hand shot up, signaling the group to slow. They rolled to a stop beside an old pickup truck that had seen better decades. The hood was propped open, steam escaping in tired breaths. Beside it stood an elderly man in a worn denim jacket and an American flag cap, his posture stooped, his hands trembling as he pushed against the dead weight of the vehicle. "Come on, old friend, don't give up on me now," he muttered under his breath, sweat dripping down his temple. The bikers exchanged looks. They'd seen enough roadside cons and setups to know better than to stop, but something about this old man didn't fit that picture. His truck wasn't bait, it was history. The stickers on the bumper told the story. U.S. Army, Vietnam veteran. Ryder kicked down his stand and approached slowly. "You all right there, old-timer?" The man looked up, startled but grateful. She just gave out on me. Guess she's as tired as I am." He chuckled softly, though his eyes betrayed exhaustion. "Where are you headed?" Ryder asked. "Iron Springs," the man replied. "Got a veterans meet tonight. Was bringing something special, a flag for my unit." He gestured to a folded cloth on the passenger seat, edges frayed from years of holding on. "But she won't go another mile." Behind Ryder, a few of the bikers muttered quietly. Tango, a bulky man with tattoos crawling up his neck, scoffed. "Man, the guy's probably broke. Ain't got gas money, let alone for repairs." Lexi, the only woman in the group, glared at him. "Show some respect, Tango. He's a vet." The old man smiled weakly. "It's all right. He's not wrong. Money's tight. Always is." He leaned against the truck, wincing at a twinge in his leg. Before Ryder could reply, another sound cut through the still air, a low, steady rumble from down the road. They all turned to see a lone motorcycle approaching, black and sleek against the crimson light. The rider wore a dark helmet, visor down, clothes dusty from miles of travel. The bike rolled to a stop a few feet away. The engine idled quietly, almost respectfully. The stranger dismounted, his movements calm and deliberate. No one recognized him yet. He looked at the old man, then at the broken truck, and said in a voice soft but steady, "Need a hand, sir?" Walter Briggs blinked, taken aback by the kindness in the tone. "If you don't mind, son, I could sure use one." The wind picked up, carrying desert sand across the fading highway. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows on the cracked asphalt. The Iron Hawks watched silently, curiosity flickering in their eyes. None of them had any idea that this stranger, with his calm voice and quiet strength, would soon change all their lives forever. Ryder nodded at the stranger, sizing him up. The man didn't look like a biker in the usual sense, no gang patches, no attitude. Just a calm presence and a quiet confidence that made everyone else seem louder by comparison. "Yeah, we could use an extra hand," Ryder said. "This truck's seen better days." The stranger walked over to the open hood and leaned in. He didn't say much, just looked carefully at the rusted engine, the cracked hoses, and the coolant dripping onto the ground. "Overheated radiator," he said finally. "Might have blown the gasket too." Walter sighed. "That's what I was afraid of. I barely made it out of Albuquerque. Should have stayed put, but I couldn't miss that meeting." Lexi reached into her bag and pulled out a water bottle, handing it to Walter. "Drink this. You look ready to drop." He accepted it with shaking hands. "Thank you, ma'am. You folks are the first to stop all day. I waved at a dozen cars, but I guess an old man on the side of the road isn't worth slowing down for." The stranger glanced at the horizon, where the last of the sun bled into the sky. His jaw tightened slightly. "That's not right," he said quietly. "No one should be left stranded." Ryder nodded toward his crew. "Tango, grab that rope from the trailer. We'll tow him to Iron Springs. There's a mechanic there that owes me a favor." Tango frowned but obeyed. "Man, this day's getting longer by the minute," he muttered. Ryder gave him a sharp look. "We're not leaving a vet behind. Got it?" As they hooked up the truck, Walter smiled faintly. "You fellas don't have to do this." Ryder shrugged. "We know what it's like to be stuck in the middle of nowhere with no one coming. We got you." The stranger stepped forward, tightening one of the straps. His hands were steady, his movements efficient, like he'd done this 100 times. He glanced at Walter and said, "Iron Springs, right? You'll make it there tonight." Walter nodded, gratitude glimmering in his weary eyes. "You sure sound like a man who knows the road." "Been on it long enough," the stranger replied with a faint smile. As the convoy prepared to move, Ryder looked back. "Appreciate the help, brother. You riding with us?" The stranger paused, his helmet reflecting the deep orange glow of the sky. "If you don't mind the company," Ryder smirked. "We don't mind a good rider. Just keep up." The engines roared to life again, a symphony of thunder rolling into the night. The black bike merged with the formation effortlessly, moving in rhythm like it belonged there all along. Lexi glanced over her shoulder, catching one last glimpse of the old man's relieved smile as the convoy pulled onto the highway. The desert wind howled around them, and the stranger's bike glided silently beside Ryder's. None of them yet knew who he was. But deep down, Ryder sensed this wasn't just another drifter passing through. Something about him, his stillness, his presence, felt like fate crossing paths with the broken and the lost. The convoy rolled forward slowly, the fading sunlight casting long ribbons of gold across the open road. The air smelled of gasoline, sagebrush, and old asphalt every mile, humming with stories untold. The Iron Hawks kept their formation tight, their tires cutting a steady rhythm over the cracks of Route 66. Ryder glanced at the rearview mirror of his Harley and saw the stranger's black bike gliding effortlessly in the lineup. No wobble, no rush, just smooth precision. Whoever he was, he knew the rhythm of the road. The way he leaned into turns, the calmness in his throttle, he wasn't new to this life. Beside him, Lexi leaned closer and said over the wind, "You think he's one of us?" Ryder shook his head. No patches, no club, just someone who rides like he means it. The last of the daylight slipped away, leaving behind the slow blink of stars. The road stretched endlessly ahead, a silver ribbon under the moonlight. Walter's truck followed behind, towed gently by Tango's Harley, the old engine silent but secure. The flag in the passenger seat caught the wind through the cracked window, fluttering like a heartbeat that refused to stop. When they finally pulled over near a quiet rest stop to check the straps, Walter stepped out of the cab. He looked around at the group, his face etched with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you folks," he said, his voice catching. Keanu, still just the quiet stranger to them, gave a faint smile. "You already did. You didn't give up." Walter looked at him for a moment, something thoughtful flickering in his eyes. "You sound like someone who knows what that means." The man only nodded, slipping his gloves back on. As the engines started again, the desert night deepened around them. The horizon ahead was dark, unknown, and beautiful. None of them spoke of destiny or purpose. They didn't need to. Sometimes the right people meet on the wrong road for a reason only the journey understands. By the time they reached Iron Springs, the moon had climbed high. The black bike stayed near the back, its headlight glowing faintly, almost ghost-like. Ryder glanced in his mirror once more and thought, that man doesn't ride to escape. He rides to find something. He didn't know that the answer was already beginning with them. Right there on that lonely stretch of Route 66, the convoy pulled into a quiet roadside patch just outside Iron Springs. The desert air had cooled, carrying that dry, smoky scent of evening. The bikes idled to a stop, their engines ticking down like beating hearts finding rest. Walter eased himself out of the truck, rubbing his shoulder as he stepped onto the cracked pavement. His face was lined with years of hard living, but there was dignity in the way he held himself, even in exhaustion. Ryder walked up beside him. "You sure you're all right, old man?" Walter nodded, though it was a weary nod. "I'll live. Can't say the same for my truck, though." He gave a humorless chuckle, glancing back at the smoke curling from under the hood. "She's been with me since '84. Guess we both hit the end of the road sooner or later." Lexi crouched by the front tire, her dark braid slipping forward. "We'll take a look. Maybe it's not as bad as it looks." Walter smiled faintly. "I appreciate that, miss, but unless one of you's a miracle worker with spare parts, I think she's done." Tango leaned on his bike, lighting a cigarette. "So what's the story, old-timer? Running away from home or something?" Ryder shot him a sharp look. "Enough." Walter didn't seem offended. He just took a slow breath. "Heading to a veterans club up in Iron Springs. We meet there every year, me and the last few from my unit. It ain't much, just coffee, some music, old war stories. This year I was bringing something special." He walked to the passenger side and pulled out a folded flag, wrapped carefully in a faded cloth. "This was with us the day we left Da Nang. My boy helped me stitch it back when he was 10. His voice trembled slightly. "He didn't make it home from Afghanistan. Thought maybe hanging this at the club might mean something." Lexi's eyes softened. "That's beautiful, Walter." He nodded, trying to keep his composure. "Yeah, well, I thought the least I could do was show up. But pensions don't stretch much these days. I barely had enough gas money to get this far. Now..." He looked at the truck, his jaw tightening. "Now I can't even do that right." Silence settled over the group. The wind moved through the dry grass like a whisper. Keanu stood a few steps away, sunglasses catching the faint light of the setting sun. He didn't say anything at first. He just watched Walter, his expression unreadable, but his body still listening in a way few people ever did. Finally, he stepped closer and crouched beside the old man, resting his hands on his knees. "Where's the club?" he asked quietly. Walter looked up, surprised by the question. "Iron Springs, about 20 miles north." Keanu nodded once. "Then we'll get you there." Walter frowned. "You don't have to do that, son." Keanu's voice was calm. "Maybe we don't, but we should." The others glanced at each other. For a reason none of them could explain, they didn't argue. The night grew quieter, broken only by the faint hum of crickets and the clicking of cooling metal from the truck's engine. Ryder leaned over the open hood with a flashlight, squinting as he poked around the old machinery. "Yeah," he muttered. "She's done for tonight. Radiator's cracked, maybe the head gasket too." Walter rubbed his forehead, looking defeated. "That figures. Guess I pushed her 1 mile too far." Lexi, still crouched near the front bumper, frowned. "You sure you don't have someone you can call? A family member? Maybe a friend nearby?" Walter shook his head. "No one close anymore. My buddies are waiting for me at the club. They'll think I flaked, but I didn't. I promised I'd bring that flag." He pointed to the folded cloth, sitting gently on the hood. "That's my boy's last gift to me. I made him a promise, too, that I'd keep it flying." Keanu stood behind them, hands in his jacket pockets, the desert wind brushing against his face. He didn't say anything for a long moment, just looked at Walter with quiet respect. The others were restless, shifting their weight, checking their bikes, anxious to keep moving. Tango broke the silence first. "Well, We can't fix it here. Maybe we push it off the road and head out. Ain't much we can do anyway. Ryder shot him a sharp glare. You gonna leave him here, Tango? Tango exhaled smoke through his nose. Man, come on. We've all got our own problems. Lexi rose to her feet, brushing dust off her jeans. Not like this, we don't. Not tonight. Keanu stepped closer, his voice calm but firm. He's not just some guy stuck on the side of the road. He's someone who served. That flag he's carrying, somebody died for that. Maybe his son. Maybe his brother. He glanced at Walter briefly, his tone softening. You can tell a lot about a man by what he refuses to abandon. The group fell silent. Even Tango looked away, his expression uneasy. Ryder cleared his throat. There's a small-town mechanic in Iron Springs. Old buddy of mine named Peterson. He's probably got a tow rig sitting idle. Lexi nodded. I'll call him. She pulled out her phone, stepping a few paces away while the others stood under the orange glow of the truck's hazard lights. Walter watched her go, then looked at Ryder. You folks don't need to trouble yourselves. I can just spend the night here. Ain't the first time I've slept in this truck. Ryder gave him a tired half-smile. Well, tonight's not going to be one of those nights. Keanu turned back toward the truck, scanning its frame and the ground beneath. If we can get it on a flatbed, we'll make it to Iron Springs before midnight. He crouched again, checking the alignment of the front wheels. You said 20 miles, right? Walter nodded. Just 20. Keanu nodded once, a quiet decision forming behind his eyes. Lexi returned a few minutes later, holding up her phone. Peterson said he's got a flatbed we can borrow. He'll leave it by the gas station on the south side of Iron Springs. Says we can pick it up any time. Ryder clapped his hands together. That's our ticket. Tango, you and Jax go grab it. Tango groaned, tossing his cigarette to the dirt. Man, this is turning into a full-on rescue mission. Ryder grinned. Then congratulations, brother. You just got promoted to Road Angel. The group laughed lightly, the tension easing. Walter looked at them with disbelief. You people are something else, he said softly. Didn't think anyone stopped for folks like me anymore. Keanu looked over at him. Sometimes it takes the right people crossing the same road at the same time. When the flatbed arrived, everyone got to work. The headlights of the bikes and the truck illuminated the scene like a stage in the desert. Ryder and Lexi positioned the straps. Jax guided the winch, and Keanu took the lead at the rear bumper, pushing with steady strength. Walter tried to help, but his knees buckled halfway through. I'm fine, he said quickly, but Keanu caught him before he stumbled. You've done enough, sir, he said gently. Let us handle it. Ryder looked up from tightening the chains. You sure know your way around this stuff, stranger. What'd you do before riding? Keanu just smiled slightly, adjusting a strap. Little bit of everything. They finished loading the truck, securing it for the ride ahead. The wind had turned colder, carrying the scent of rain from far away. Walter looked at the group, these rough-edged bikers with their scars, their laughter, and their unspoken kindness, and shook his head in wonder. I thought all bikers were trouble, he said quietly. Ryder chuckled. Some of us used to be. Guess we're making up for lost time. Keanu met Walter's eyes and nodded. You gave this country your time. Least we can do is give you a ride. The old man swallowed hard, moved beyond words. The flatbed was ready, the flag safe in the cab beside him. As they mounted their bikes again, the engines roared to life. Keanu's black Norton glowed faintly under the moonlight, the chrome catching the reflection of the American flag through the windshield. And as the convoy rolled out, heading toward Iron Springs, Walter looked out the side mirror. He saw the quiet stranger riding among them, steady and calm, like he'd been part of their brotherhood all along. The convoy reached Iron Springs just past 9. The neon lights of an old diner flickered at the edge of town, casting long reflections over the cracked asphalt. The sign read, Judy's Roadside Cafe, letters faded from years of wind and rain. It was the kind of place that smelled like strong coffee, motor oil, and bacon grease, a haven for truckers and wanderers who'd seen too much of the road. Ryder signaled the group to pull over. Let's grab some food before we drop Walter off, he said. The bikers parked their motorcycles in a neat row, their engines cooling with soft metallic pops. The flatbed carrying Walter's truck came to a stop just outside the diner's gravel lot. Walter stepped out, his movements stiff but steady. The long ride had worn him down, but the promise of warmth and food seemed to give him a small spark. Keanu walked beside him toward the entrance, steadying him without making it obvious. Inside, the diner was half full. The jukebox in the corner played an old country song, and a few regulars turned to stare as the Iron Hawks walked in leather vests, tattoos, and worn boots, making an intimidating sight. Walter hesitated, but Keanu gently touched his shoulder. "Go on in," he said quietly. "You're with friends." The waitress, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and her name Judy stitched on her apron, came over with a practiced smile. "Table for how many?" Ryder looked around. "7, plus one truck that's seen better days." She chuckled. "Plenty of room, sugar. Booth or table?" "Table," Lexi answered, already pulling two together. They settled in. Walter took the end seat, looking uneasy. His calloused hand stayed on his lap as if he didn't belong there. The bikers ordered burgers, fries, and coffee strong enough to keep them awake through the next 100 miles. Keanu didn't order right away. He waited until everyone else had spoken, then quietly asked for a black coffee and a slice of apple pie. When Judy walked away, Ryder noticed how the stranger didn't even look at the menu. "You been here before?" Ryder asked. Keanu shook his head. "No, just places like it." Walter finally spoke, voice low but clear. "This kind of place doesn't change much. Been eating at diners like this since I got home from the war. Always the same smell, same worn floors, same kind of people." Tango leaned back, yawning. "Yeah, except now they serve avocado toast somewhere in California." Lexi kicked his boot under the table. "Show some respect, man." Walter smiled a little. "It's all right. I've seen worse company." The food arrived steaming hot. They dug in, the clinking of forks and low murmurs filling the air. Walter's hands shook slightly as he reached for his cup of coffee. Keanu noticed and quietly steadied it without drawing attention. When the old man tried to pay, Judy shook her head gently. "Already covered." Walter blinked. "What? Who?" But Keanu just looked out the window, watching the headlights of a passing truck disappear into the night. Judy refilled the coffee cups, her eyes drifting to the quiet man sitting among the leather-clad group. There was something familiar about him, the calm voice, the mannerisms, but she couldn't quite place it. "That guy looks familiar," she whispered to the cook behind the counter. "You think he's one of those movie folks passing through?" The cook shrugged. "If he is, he's not acting like one." At the table, conversation picked up again. Tango was telling an exaggerated story about getting lost in Arizona, trying to make everyone laugh. Lexi rolled her eyes while Ryder chuckled under his breath. Walter, sitting at the end, smiled politely, though his tired eyes stayed fixed on his plate. He barely touched his food. Keanu noticed. He slid his cup toward him. "Coffee's better when it's shared," he said softly. Walter hesitated but smiled and accepted the refill. "You remind me of my boy," he said. "He always looked out for everyone else before himself." Keanu nodded, the words settling heavy in the air. "Sounds like he was a good man." "He was," Walter said quietly. "Didn't get enough years to show it." The table fell silent for a moment. Even Tango stopped talking. The sound of the jukebox filled the space with an old tune about missing home. Then, the door swung open, the bell above it jingling sharply. Two younger men walked in, locals by the look of them. One of them, tall and loud, spotted Walter's jacket and sneered. "What's this? Some kind of veteran reunion?" Ryder's jaw tightened. Lexi frowned. Tango muttered, "Oh boy, here we go." Walter lowered his eyes. "Just eating dinner, son," he said gently. The young man laughed. "Yeah, sure. Maybe next you'll tell us you saved the country or something." His friend chuckled behind him. Tango's chair screeched as he stood up. "You got a problem, kid?" Judy froze behind the counter, watching nervously. Ryder put a hand on Tango's arm. "Let it go," he warned. But Tango's temper was already lit. "Nah, I'm tired of punks disrespecting folks who actually built something in this country. Keanu rose slowly from his seat, placing himself between Tango and the young men. His voice stayed calm but carried weight. Sometimes it takes more strength not to swing, he said. Tango blinked at him. What's that supposed to mean? Keanu met his eyes. It means you already won. You stood up for him without hitting anyone. That's the kind of strength they don't teach. The young men glanced at each other, embarrassed. Without another word, they left, the door slamming behind them. Judy exhaled in relief. Well, she said softly, guess I owe you folks dessert on the house. Ryder watched Keanu carefully, an odd respect forming behind his eyes. You've got a way of calming storms, brother. Keanu smiled faintly. Storms don't scare me. People forgetting their kindness does. The room relaxed again after the confrontation, though a quiet awe lingered. Tango sat down, still breathing heavily, but a trace of shame softened his expression. Guess I let my mouth get ahead of me, he muttered. Keanu gave him a reassuring nod. We all do. What matters is what you do next. Walter looked down the table at him, his eyes warm. That was something, son. You handled that better than most folks would have. Keanu smiled lightly. Just trying to keep the peace. Anger doesn't build much. It usually just burns what's already standing. Lexi leaned back in her chair, watching him with interest. You talk like someone who's been around a lot of fire. He didn't deny it. I've seen my share. He lifted his cup, took a quiet sip, and added, the trick is learning when to let it die out. Ryder studied him across the table. He'd met plenty of men on the road, fighters, drifters, mechanics, dreamers. But this one was different. There was a stillness about him that didn't come from fear or pride, but from understanding, like he'd made peace with something everyone else was still chasing. The group finished their meals. Laughter returned. This time, lighter, genuine. Walter finally ate without hesitation, encouraged by the warmth surrounding him. Judy brought out extra pie for the table, claiming it was for heroes and hard workers alike. When the check came, Walter instinctively reached for his worn wallet, but Judy stopped him. It's already taken care of. He looked confused. By who? Judy nodded toward the end of the table. But by the time Walter turned, Keanu was already slipping on his gloves. The stranger gave Judy a quiet smile, handed her a folded bill for the whole table, and said, "Thank you for taking care of them." Walter stood, catching up to him near the door. You didn't have to do that. Keanu shook his head. Sure I did. You've done enough for everyone else. The veteran swallowed hard, words caught in his throat. I don't even know your name. Keanu opened the door, the cold night air rushing in. Just a guy going the same direction, he said, stepping out into the dark. The bell above the door jingled softly as he left. Ryder watched him disappear into the parking lot, the sound of his motorcycle starting up echoing against the still night. For the first time in a long while, the Iron Hawks sat in silence, thinking not about where they were headed, but about who they'd just met. The night stretched long and quiet after they left the diner. The group rode out of Iron Springs until the lights faded behind them, replaced by the vast silence of the open desert. Stars spilled across the sky like scattered dust, cold and brilliant. They found a small clearing off an old service road, a spot where the cracked ground met the shadow of a canyon ridge. Ryder parked first and dismounted, shaking out his shoulders. This'll do, he said. We'll camp here tonight. Tango and Jax began gathering brush for a fire while Lexi unpacked a small cooler of leftovers Judy had insisted they take. Walter, exhausted but content, sat by his truck, looking up at the stars as if he were counting old friends. Keanu quietly helped set up a small fire ring, his movements efficient, almost practiced. When the flames finally caught, they burned low and steady, painting the faces around it in amber light. No one spoke for a while. The crackling fire, the hum of cicadas, and the occasional pop of embers filled the space between them. It was a comfortable silence, the kind that comes when people share something unspoken, something like peace. Ryder stared into the fire, lost in thought. The lines on his face deepened in the flickering light. Finally, he broke the quiet. "You know, a few years back, nobody would have believed the Iron Hawks would be sitting here doing good deeds," Tango grunted. "Hell, I barely believe it myself." Ryder smiled without humor. "Yeah, well, life's got a way of forcing you to change or die. And we've already buried too many." Lexi's eyes lowered. "You don't have to bring up the past." "Maybe not," Ryder said softly. "But the past don't go away just because you stop talking about it." He picked up a stick and poked at the fire. "We weren't always the kind of crew people could trust. Used to run with some rough folks. Fights, smuggling, all the wrong roads." Walter looked up from his seat near the truck, listening quietly. Ryder continued, his voice low. "Then one night, our youngest Eddie got killed in a brawl we started. 19 years old. Thought he was invincible. That night, I realized I'd built something that only knew how to destroy." Lexi reached out, touching his arm. "You turned it around, Rye. You gave us a new reason to ride." Ryder nodded slowly. "Yeah, we made a choice. To stay on the road, but ride for something different. Started helping stranded travelers, fixing up bikes for single moms, working food drives. People think we're still the same outlaws we used to be. Maybe we deserve that. But we're trying." Keanu listened in silence, the flames reflecting in his dark eyes. The fire crackled softly as the night deepened. The desert wind swept across the clearing, carrying the faint scent of dry sage. Lexi pulled her jacket tighter, watching the sparks drift upward like tiny stars trying to find their way home. "People still cross the street when they see our jackets," she said quietly. "We walk into a store and folks grab their kids. They don't see who we are now, only who we used to be." Ryder nodded, his expression heavy. "That's the price of reputation. You spend years building it the wrong way, and you'll spend the rest of your life paying it back." Tango tossed a branch into the fire and muttered, "Sometimes I wonder if we'll ever pay it off. Seems like no matter what we do, people only see the bad." Keanu glanced at him from across the flames. "You can't control what they see," he said. "You can only control what you keep doing." Tango frowned. "Easy for you to say, man. You don't wear this patch. You don't carry the history." Keanu nodded slowly. "You're right. I don't. But everyone's got something they're trying to outrun. A mistake, a loss, a name that sticks longer than it should." His voice was calm, but it carried weight. The firelight flickered across his face, showing just enough of the man behind the quiet. Ryder leaned forward. "What about you? You sound like someone who's seen both sides of that coin." Keanu took a breath, his gaze distant. "I've seen people lose themselves trying to escape who they were. But I've also seen what happens when they stop running, when they start facing it." He paused. "Freedom isn't about getting away from your past. It's about facing it and choosing who you ride beside." For a long moment, no one said a word. Even the desert seemed to listen. Walter's voice broke the silence, rough but steady. "That's truth right there. Most folks don't understand that kind of freedom anymore." Lexi looked over at him. "You've had your share of fighting for freedom, haven't you?" Walter smiled faintly. "In uniform and out of it. But the hardest fight isn't on the battlefield, it's keeping your heart from going cold after it's all over." Ryder nodded. "Ain't that the truth?" He threw another piece of wood into the flames and leaned back against a rock. "Guess we're all just trying to keep that heart warm somehow." Keanu's expression softened. "That's why you stopped tonight. You didn't know him, but you knew what leaving him behind would have felt like." Ryder studied him closely. "You talk like you've carried that weight before." Keanu's eyes glimmered under the firelight. "Maybe I have." The fire burned lower now, soft orange coals glowing beneath a canopy of stars. The night had turned cold, the kind that reminded everyone how far they were from the noise of the world. Walter sat close to the warmth. His face lit in the flickering light. He looked at the bikers one by one, his voice low. "You boys remind me of my old unit. We weren't saints either. We fought, we cursed, we messed things up plenty. But when the smoke cleared, we always had each other's backs. Lexi smiled gently. Guess that's what this is too. Different kind of uniform, same kind of loyalty. Walter nodded. That loyalty is what keeps men alive. Don't ever lose it. For a moment, no one moved. The fire popped softly. Ryder leaned forward, rubbing his hands together. You know, he said quietly, we started calling ourselves the Iron Hawks because we thought it sounded tough. But these days, I think it's less about the name and more about who we're trying to be. Maybe we're just trying to learn to fly the right way again. Keanu watched him, thoughtful. Maybe that's what redemption really is. Not forgetting the past, just learning how to rise above it. Ryder looked into the fire, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. You've got a way with words, brother. Keanu shrugged lightly. Words are easy. Living them's the hard part. The old veteran nodded in agreement. You're a wise man, son. Not many left who understand what that word means anymore. Tango tossed another branch onto the fire. Maybe that's why he rides alone, he said, half joking, half curious. Keanu gave a small, knowing smile. Sometimes you have to be alone for a while to remember what kind of man you want to be when you're not. Lexi looked into the flames, the reflection glimmering in. Her eyes. I think we all know that feeling. The wind shifted then, carrying the sound of distant coyotes over the ridge. The firelight danced across their faces, each one hardened by miles and mistakes, but softened tonight by the company of something real. No one spoke again for a long time. They just sat together, surrounded by the desert's silence, the warmth of the fire, and the quiet understanding that for the first time in a long while, they weren't just a group of bikers. They were men and women finally learning what it meant to belong again. And as the flames dwindled, Keanu looked into the last glowing embers and thought, freedom isn't found on the road. It's found beside the people you choose to ride with. The fire had burned down to a low orange glow, crackling softly as the desert night pressed in around them. The group sat close, the warmth flickering across their faces. Most of the bikers had gone quiet, lulled by exhaustion and the stillness of the hour. But Walter was wide awake, staring into the coals like they held the ghosts of old memories. Keanu sat beside him, his jacket draped over a rock, his hands clasped loosely in front of him. Ryder and Lexi had wandered toward their bikes to talk, their voices low, leaving the two men alone by the fire. After a long silence, Walter spoke. You ever feel like the world keeps moving and forgets to take you with it? His voice cracked, slightly, dry and low. Like one day you wake up and realize you don't belong anywhere anymore. Keanu turned toward him. Yeah, he said softly. More times than I can count. Walter nodded slowly. I figured as much. You've got that look like someone who's seen things he doesn't talk about. He poked the fire with a stick, sparks floating upward. I used to be a mechanic. Tank division, Vietnam, 69 through 71. Didn't see much glory. Just engines, mud, and nights that felt like years. Keanu listened quietly. When I came home, Walter continued, I married the only girl who waited for me. Her name was Diane. Sweetest laugh you ever heard. We had one boy, Calvin. Smart kid, strong heart. He wanted to follow in my footsteps, but the world he stepped into wasn't the same one I came back to. He swallowed hard. He joined the Marines, said he wanted to make a difference. I didn't stop him. How could I? That was the last real conversation we ever had. The wind sighed through the canyon, carrying his words into the darkness. He was killed overseas 12 years ago, Walter said finally. IED outside Kandahar. The flag they sent home is the one I keep folded in the truck. I've taken it to every veterans club, meeting since. Not because it makes the pain go away. It just reminds me someone once cared enough to try. Keanu's gaze stayed on the fire, his jaw tight. After Diane passed, I stopped going for a while, Walter said. Didn't see the point, but the fellas kept calling, kept checking on me. I realized those gatherings aren't just about stories. They're about survival. Every man in that room's fighting a war that doesn't make the news anymore." He let out a small, tired breath. "That's why I had to get there. Even if my truck gave up, I couldn't." Keanu nodded. "And you did." Walter gave a faint smile. "With a little help, yeah." The fire popped, sending a brief shower of sparks skyward. Keanu stared into the flames and said quietly, "You served your country. Now it's our turn to serve you." Walter's voice grew quieter, the kind of tone that made everyone else stop moving. "Thing is," he said, "I don't want to be a burden. I know what it's like to have people feel sorry for you. Folks see the hat, the jacket, the medals, they nod, say thanks, then move on. Nobody wants to hear about the nights that still wake you up." Ryder nodded slowly. "You don't owe anyone an apology for surviving." Walter smiled faintly. "Try telling that to a man who watched better men die. You start to wonder why it wasn't you. Guess that's the kind of question that never gets an answer." Keanu stared into the fire, the reflection of the flames glinting in his eyes. "Maybe the answer's not about why you made it," he said softly. "Maybe it's about what you're still here to do." Walter looked at him thoughtfully, his gaze heavy with memory. "You talk like someone who's carried loss." Keanu didn't look away. "I think most of us have. The road's full of people trying to find peace in the wreckage." The old man nodded. "Maybe that's what I've been doing all these years. Trying to find something worth fixing. But even the truck, my last piece of independence, gave up on me." Lexi leaned in, her voice gentle. "We'll get it running again, Walter. One way or another." He gave her a grateful smile. "That means more than you think. But I can't pay for repairs. My pension barely covers rent and food. I already owe Peterson at the garage more than I should." Tango shifted uncomfortably. "Man, don't worry about that tonight. We'll figure something out tomorrow." Ryder nodded. "He's right. We've pulled off worse." Walter looked down at his hands, rough and scarred from years of work. "You're good people. Most wouldn't stop for a man like me." "I didn't expect kindness from a group of bikers." Ryder chuckled softly. "We surprise people sometimes." Walter's eyes misted slightly as he looked back at the fire. "You know, Diane used to tell me kindness was like a spark. You pass it along or you let it die. Maybe I still got a few sparks left to give." Keanu's gaze lingered on the firelight dancing across Walter's face. "Maybe that's why you met us tonight." The old veteran smiled tiredly. "If that's true, then maybe fate's got a better sense of humor than I thought." The group fell silent again, the fire crackling softly. Above them, the stars shimmered brighter, cold and endless, watching over the small circle of people bound by something far greater than coincidence. Keanu leaned back slightly, taking out his phone under the cover of darkness. As the others drifted into quiet conversation, he began typing a message, one that would change everything for the man sitting beside him. The fire was dying down, its glow now a dim pulse in the dark. Walter had dozed off beside his truck, his hat tilted forward over his eyes, the folded flag resting on his lap like a sacred weight. The rest of the group settled near their bikes, talking in low murmurs before drifting into sleep. Only Keanu stayed. Awake, his face lit faintly by the blue light of his phone screen. He scrolled through a contact list until he found a number labeled Peterson's Auto, Iron Springs. He hesitated for a moment, glancing at Walter's sleeping figure, then pressed call. After a few rings, a gruff voice answered. "Peterson here. Who's calling this late?" "Sorry for the hour," Keanu said quietly. "I've got a veteran who's going to need some help with a truck tomorrow morning. It's the blue Chevy with the flag in the window. I'd like you to repair everything it needs. Full overhaul." Peterson grunted. "That'll cost more than the truck's worth." "I know," Keanu replied, calm but certain. "That's why I'll cover it. Anonymous payment. No mention of me." The mechanic paused, then sighed. "You one of those charity folks?" "Just someone heading the same direction," Keanu said. "Send the bill to the number I'll text you after this call." "All right, stranger," Peterson said. "You got it." Keanu hung up, typed out a short text, and then pulled out a small notepad from his jacket pocket. On it, he wrote in clean, steady handwriting, "Freedom isn't just riding on the road. It's helping others get up. He folded the note and tucked it under the wiper of Walter's truck, right beside the old flag. The flames flickered behind him, reflecting off the metal of his bike. When he returned to the campfire, Ryder stirred slightly. "You still up?" he murmured. "Yeah," Keanu said softly. "Just thinking." Ryder nodded, half asleep. "You do that a lot?" "Only when it matters," Keanu replied. He sat by the last embers, watching them fade into darkness. The desert around them fell silent again. No engines, no noise, just the soft breath of the wind moving across the sand. For the first time that night, Keanu allowed himself a small, private smile. Tomorrow, Walter would wake up to more than a repaired truck. He'd wake up to a reminder that kindness still traveled the same roads as he did, and that somewhere out there, a stranger had chosen to ride in the same direction. The desert morning came soft and golden, washing the world in a pale light that shimmered over the empty highway. A cool breeze carried the smell of dust and sage through the camp. Birds chirped from somewhere far off, the kind of sound that made the world feel alive again after a long silence. Walter stirred first, waking to the quiet hum of dawn. His back ached, his hands stiff, but the peace of the morning wrapped around him like an old friend. He blinked, rubbing his eyes, and looked toward his truck. For a moment, he thought his mind was playing tricks on him. The old blue Chevy sat gleaming under the sunrise, its hood lowered, paint polished to a shine. The sag in the tires was gone. The engine no longer coughed or hissed. It looked alive again, like the machine had found its second wind. Walter stood slowly, his breath catching. "Well, I'll be," he whispered. He stepped closer, touching the smooth metal. The hood felt warm, almost new. Then he noticed something else, a folded piece of paper tucked neatly under the windshield wiper. He picked it up with trembling fingers, unfolding it carefully. The handwriting was clean and simple. Freedom isn't just riding on the road, it's helping others get up. Walter read the words twice, his lips parting in disbelief. He looked around at the sleeping camp, his voice trembling. Who did this?" Ryder was the next awake. He yawned, stretching his arms before sitting up. "What's going on, old man?" Walter turned, holding up the note. "This," he said. "This was on my truck, and it's fixed. Look at her. She's running again." Ryder blinked, squinting at the truck as he got to his feet. "No way," he muttered. "We didn't even call Peterson yet." Lexi emerged from her blanket, rubbing her eyes. "Wait, what are you talking about?" Walter waved the note in the air, still half laughing, half crying. "Somebody fixed my truck in the middle of the night. Whoever it was, they didn't just repair it. They brought it back to life." Tango stumbled over, coffee in hand, looking skeptical. "You're saying some magical roadside mechanic showed up at midnight and did all this?" Ryder frowned, walking closer to inspect. He opened the hood and stared. The engine gleamed, newly tuned and spotless. "That's Peterson's work," he said quietly. "I know that man's touch anywhere," Lexi gasped. "You think Peterson came all the way out here in the middle of the night?" Ryder shook his head. "Not unless somebody called him." His gaze drifted toward Keanu, who was calmly rolling up his sleeping bag by his motorcycle, quiet as ever. Ryder's eyes narrowed slightly as he walked toward Keanu. The stranger was methodical, folding his blanket, packing his gear, moving with that calm sense of purpose that made everyone else slow down just watching him. "You didn't happen to make a call last night, did you?" Ryder asked. Keanu glanced up briefly, the faintest smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Depends who's asking." Ryder crossed his arms. "A truck doesn't fix itself, brother. And Peterson's the only guy around here who could have done that work." Keanu zipped his bag shut. "Then maybe you already have your answer." Walter came closer, still holding the folded note like a treasure. His eyes were wet, his voice unsteady. "Was it you?" Keanu met his gaze. "Does it matter?" "It does to me," Walter said. "A man ought to thank the one who helps him stand again." Keanu paused, then looked down at the note in Walter's hand. "You already did." The old man's lips trembled into a smile. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll keep driving." Keanu replied softly. That's enough. The group fell silent. Even Tango, usually quick with a wisecrack, had nothing to add. The sound of the desert wind filled the space between them, carrying with it something sacred. Lexi brushed a tear from her cheek and said quietly, "You really did call Peterson, didn't you?" Keanu shrugged. "He's good with engines. I just asked him to give this one a second chance." Ryder chuckled, shaking his head. "You've got a strange way of helping people. Quiet, no names, no credit." Keanu fastened his bag to the back of his bike. "Not everything good has to be seen." Walter ran a hand over the hood, tracing the reflection of the sunrise in the newly polished paint. "She hasn't looked this good in 20 years, he said softly. "Feels like my boy's watching." Ryder put a hand on the old man's shoulder. "Then let's make sure he sees you drive her home." Walter laughed through his tears. "Home, huh? Guess it's been a while since I called anywhere that." Keanu stepped closer, holding out Walter's keys. "Then maybe today's the day that changes." The old man looked down at the keys, then at Keanu, and for a long moment, neither spoke. Something unspoken passed between them: respect, gratitude, and understanding born from loss. Ryder turned to his crew. "Mount up, Hawks. We're riding with him." Engines began rumbling to life one by one. The sound rolled across the canyon like thunder, low and proud. Walter climbed into his truck, his hands trembling as he turned the ignition. The motor purred instantly, smooth and strong. As the sun climbed higher, the old Chevy rolled forward, flanked on both sides by roaring motorcycles. It looked less like a ride and more like an escort of guardians. The convoy pulled onto Route 66 once again, the highway stretching out before them like a ribbon of light. The roar of engines echoed through the canyon, bouncing off the red rock walls as the convoy moved like a living force. The morning light spilled across the open desert, catching the chrome of the bikes and the clean blue of Walter's truck. To anyone passing by, it might have looked like a film scene, a pack of bikers escorting an old man with a flag fluttering proudly from his window. But to them, it was something simpler. It was a promise kept. Walter drove with a steadiness he hadn't felt in years. The truck's steering wheel vibrated with new life beneath his hands. He caught glimpses of the bikers riding alongside him. Ryder up front, Lexi beside him, Tango behind, keeping the line tight. And just off his left mirror, Keanu rode calmly, his black bike slicing through the wind, the morning sun glinting off his helmet. Every so often, Walter glanced at him, the quiet man who'd changed everything without saying much at all. There was a peace about him, not the loud kind that shouted its virtue, but the quiet kind that made others want to be better. They passed through a long stretch of empty highway. The sound of the convoy was steady and proud, a rhythm that spoke of redemption and unity. Birds took flight overhead, startled by the noise, scattering into the rising sky. Ryder lifted his hand, signaling the group to slow. As they coasted down to a stop near an overlook, the wind carried a faint hum of the distant road. Walter parked his truck and stepped out slowly. His legs ached, but his spirit felt light. He turned toward the group and said, "You didn't just fix a truck today. You fixed something I didn't know was still broken." Ryder smiled. "Guess that makes us even." Walter shook his head. "No, you boys are ahead." Keanu dismounted his bike, walked over, and extended a hand. Walter took it firmly, his eyes shining. "I wish my son could have met you," he said. Keanu nodded softly. Maybe he just did. For a moment, no one spoke. The wind brushed over them, carrying the faint rustle of the flag tied to the truck bed. It flapped gently, alive again just like its owner. Then, with the day stretching open before them, Ryder kicked his engine back on. "Let's get this man to his club," he said. The convoy rolled out again, the rumble of motorcycles rising like a heartbeat against the desert floor. And at the center of it all, Walter's truck led the way, shining under the sun, a symbol of freedom reborn. The road into Iron Springs curved gently through the hills, the morning light spilling across the small, time-worn town like a film from another era. The convoy slowed as they entered the main street, a stretch lined with shuttered shops, faded murals, and empty sidewalks. A single flag hung above the old general store, its colors dulled by sun and wind. Walter looked out the window of his truck, taking in every corner like he was seeing an old friend after too many years apart. "This place used to be full of life," he murmured. "I remember when the gas station stayed open all night, and the diner used to play country songs loud enough you could hear them down the block." Ryder pulled up alongside him, his bike idling low. "Looks like time hit this town pretty hard." Walter smiled sadly. "Yeah, most of the men who came back from the war settled here. Then jobs left, folks moved on, and the ones who stayed just got older. But the Legion Hall still stands. That's where we meet." They turned down a side street where a weathered brick building sat at the corner. The sign read, "American Legion Post, 47. The paint peeling but proud." The front steps sagged under years of wear. A few old pickup trucks were parked nearby, their bumpers covered with faded decals and rust. As the convoy rolled to a stop, a few townsfolk peeked through curtains. The roar of engines had drawn attention, a line of leather-clad bikers escorting a shining blue Chevy through the dust. It wasn't something Iron Springs saw every day. Walter parked in front of the Legion Hall and turned off the ignition. For a long moment, he didn't move. His hands stayed on the wheel, his breath steady but heavy. Then he reached over and picked up the folded flag from the passenger seat. The same flag he'd carried through war, through grief, through the long miles that led him here. He opened the door and stepped out, his movements slow but full of purpose. The sunlight caught his silver hair as he straightened his back. Ryder and the Iron Hawks followed, removing their helmets, their engines still ticking in the background. Across the cracked windows, a few faces appeared inside old veterans sitting at folding tables, cups of weak coffee in their hands. They looked out toward the commotion, curiosity mixed with concern. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with a limp, stepped to the door. "Walter Briggs?" he called, voice filled with surprise. "We thought you weren't going to make it this year." Walter smiled. "Almost didn't, Tom, but some good folks made sure I did." He nodded toward the group of bikers behind him. Ryder dipped his head politely, unsure of what to expect next. Tom stepped onto the porch, squinting at the row of motorcycles gleaming in the morning light. The old soldier's tone turned cautious. "You brought company?" Walter nodded, holding the folded flag close to his chest. "They're friends. Helped me get here when my truck broke down." Tom's gaze shifted toward Ryder and the others. His jaw tightened slightly. "Iron Hawks, huh?" The name carried a weight that hung in the air. Everyone in small-town America had heard stories about that club, the fights, the arrests, the chaos they used to bring to highways and bars. Old habits die slow, and reputations die slower. Ryder's expression stayed calm, but there was tension in his shoulders. He gave a respectful nod. "We're not who we used to be, sir. Just passing through, making sure a friend gets home safe." Tom hesitated, his eyes flicking toward Walter. "You sure about them?" Walter smiled softly. "Why? I'm sure. They didn't ask for anything, Tom. Just stopped to help when nobody else would." The door creaked open wider, and a few other veterans shuffled closer to see what was going on. Some leaned on canes, some wore their old service caps, each face etched with years of battles both fought and survived. Inside, the hall smelled of coffee, dust, and memory. Faded photographs lined the walls black and white, snapshots of young soldiers who once filled the place with laughter and purpose. "Come on in," Tom said at last. "We've got room." Walter stepped inside, the flag pressed to his chest like it might slip away if he let go. The Iron Hawks followed quietly, their heavy boots echoing across the worn floor. Keanu remained near the doorway, leaning slightly against the frame. He didn't want to intrude. He just watched. Conversation stopped as the veterans realized who had entered. The sight of the Iron Hawks patches drew stiff looks and uneasy whispers. One man muttered under his breath, "Didn't think we let outlaws in here." Lexi's eyes narrowed, but Ryder shook his head subtly, signaling her to let it go. Walter turned to face the room, his voice steady though emotion quivered beneath it. "They're not outlaws anymore. They're the reason I'm standing here today." The murmur died instantly. Even the creak of the old ceiling fan seemed to pause. Ryder shifted uncomfortably, staring at the floor. He hadn't expected gratitude, especially not in front of men who'd earned real honor. Tom looked between Walter and the bikers. "Is that true?" Walter nodded. "If they hadn't stopped, I'd still be out on the side of that highway. They didn't ask my name, didn't care where I came from. They just helped." A hush filled the hall. The veterans glanced at one another, their guarded faces softening. Keanu watched from the doorway, his eyes reflecting quiet pride as Walter's words reached every corner of the room. Tom took a long breath and stepped closer to Walter, his tone changing. "Guess I owe these folks a thank you then," he said. He extended a hand toward Ryder, who hesitated for a moment before shaking it firmly. The simple gesture broke whatever wall had been standing between them. "Much appreciated," Tom said. "Most men just drive on by these days," Ryder nodded. "We've done our share of driving by in the past. Feels good to stop once in a while." The room gave a low ripple of laughter, soft but genuine. The tension eased. Lexi smiled faintly, relief in her eyes. Tango looked down, pretending not to care. But the small grin, tugging at the corner of his mouth, gave him away. Walter moved toward the front of the hall where a small wooden podium stood beneath a dusty American flag. He placed his own folded flag on the table beside it. The room fell quiet again. The old man straightened his shoulders, his voice calm but filled with meaning. "This flag's been with me since I was 21, he said. "It's been through the rain, the fire, and a whole lot of years in between. My boy carried it on his last tour. He's gone now, but this," he touched the flag gently, "this is part of him. I wanted it to rest here, among the people who'd understand what it means." Keanu watched from the doorway, the light from outside spilling over his shoulder. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there quietly as Walter's voice carried through the hall. Walter looked back at the Iron Hawks and smiled. "And if you're wondering about these folks behind me, they're proof that second chances are real. They didn't ask for recognition. They just did what was right." Ryder's throat tightened. He wasn't used to hearing words like that. For a man like him, respect was rare, and redemption even rarer. The veterans began to rise, one by one. Some clapped softly. Others saluted. Even Tom wiped his eyes discreetly before saying, "Welcome home, Walter." Walter nodded, his own eyes glistening. "Feels good to finally be here." He stepped down, walking past Keanu. For a moment, their eyes met. Walter whispered, "You did this, didn't you?" Keanu shook his head with a gentle smile. "You did, sir. You just needed someone to remind you how." As Walter turned back to join his friends, Keanu stepped outside into the sunlight, the sound of quiet applause following him into the open air. The gathering inside the Legion Hall had grown quiet again as the coffee cups emptied and the murmurs faded into the sound of creaking floorboards. Sunlight filtered through the dusty windows, lighting the rows of worn faces, each lined with its own story of sacrifice. Someone near the front called out, "Walter, you've got the floor this year. You gonna say a few words?" Walter stood slowly. The old metal chair groaned beneath him as he pushed it back. He walked toward the podium with the flag still resting beside it, his hand trembling slightly. "I wasn't sure I'd be here today," he began, his voice low but steady. "Truck broke down 20 miles out, and I thought that was it. I figured maybe this was the year I'd miss." He paused, looking out over the room. The men and women who'd served beside him, now older, slower, carrying the quiet weight of time, watched him with patient eyes. "But then," Walter continued, "a group of bikers stopped on that highway. Didn't know me, didn't ask who I was, didn't ask for a dime. They just saw someone who needed help. And they helped." A few heads turned toward Ryder's group sitting along the wall. The Iron Hawks shifted awkwardly in their chairs, unaccustomed to being looked at like heroes. Walter smiled faintly. "They didn't just fix my truck, they restored my faith. I've seen the best and worst of people in this world. I've seen men do terrible things. But these folks reminded me that kindness still rides the same roads as the rest of us." His voice wavered slightly on the last sentence. He cleared his throat and steadied himself. When you've lived long enough, you learn that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. It's a stranger stopping to lift you when no one else will. It's people who could have driven past, but didn't. Lexi looked down, blinking away tears. Tango rubbed the back of his neck, pretending to study the floor. Even Ryder's jaw clenched, his eyes fixed on the podium. Walter placed a hand on the folded flag beside him. My son gave everything for this country. I thought I'd given everything too, but I was wrong. There's still something worth fighting for, the goodness in each other. The room fell still. A few of the veterans began nodding. The sound of someone quietly setting down a coffee cup echoed like punctuation in the silence. In the back of the hall, near the doorway, Keanu stood quietly, his head slightly bowed. He didn't move or speak. His presence blended into the background, but the small nod he gave said everything. Walter lifted his gaze. So here's to the ones still fighting the good fight, even when no one's watching. And to the strangers who stopped for a man by the road. Applause broke through the stillness, soft at first, then rising into something full and real. The applause filled the hall like a warm wave, echoing off the old wooden walls. Walter smiled through glistening eyes, his voice trembling as he said, I may be old, but I've learned something important these last few days. You don't need a uniform to serve, and you don't need a medal to matter. Sometimes the smallest act of help becomes the loudest voice of hope. He stepped down from the podium to a round of clapping hands and misty eyes. Tom, the veteran who'd once questioned the bikers, stood up slowly and extended a hand toward Ryder. Looks like we misjudged you folks, he said sincerely. Glad men like you are still out there. Ryder took his hand firmly, humbled. We're just trying to make up for lost miles, he said quietly. The veterans around the room nodded, their hardened faces softening in shared understanding. The Iron Hawks had spent years trying to shed their old image, but at that moment, they weren't outlaws anymore. They were part of something larger, a brotherhood built not by patches or colors, but by heart. Lexi leaned over to Walter. That was beautiful, she whispered. You said what we all needed to hear. Walter smiled. Guess sometimes old dogs still have something to say. The laughter that followed was light, easy, the kind that healed rather than filled silence. Keanu stayed in the back, half shadowed by the light from the door. His eyes lingered on Walter, proud but distant. The way someone looks when they see a story come full circle. He adjusted the strap on his small bag, knowing it was time to move on. Ryder caught the movement out of the corner of his eye. He turned just as Keanu stepped toward the exit, his quiet stride almost ghost-like against the sunlight streaming through the open door. Something about that walk, that calm posture, felt oddly familiar. Ryder frowned. Hey, where's our mystery man going? Lexi glanced back, then froze. Wait, you don't think. But Ryder was already standing, his heart racing as realization struck. The stillness, the kindness, the measured words, the way the man carried himself, it all fit together. His eyes widened. No way, he whispered. He stepped into the aisle, watching as the stranger swung his helmet under his arm, readying his bike outside. The sun hit his face for just a second, enough for Ryder to see the unmistakable features, the familiar calm from countless screens and headlines. Tango, noticing Ryder's expression, muttered, What? Who was he? Ryder exhaled, still stunned. That was Keanu Reeves. The words landed like a spark. Lexi's jaw dropped, and even Walter, hearing the name, turned sharply toward the door. Outside, the engine of the Black Norton rumbled to life, smooth and low. Keanu adjusted his gloves, gave one final look toward the hall, and nodded once before pulling out onto the empty road. Inside, Ryder shook his head slowly, half in disbelief, half in admiration. Man like that, he murmured. He doesn't just play heroes, he lives it. Walter smiled faintly, the note still folded in his jacket pocket. Guess freedom's not about fame after all, he said. It's about what you do when nobody's looking. And as the sound of the motorcycle faded into the horizon, every soul in that hall sat a little taller, reminded that even on forgotten roads, kindness still found its way home. The Veterans Hall was still buzzing with quiet talk long after Keanu had left. The old men huddled in groups, sharing memories and stories that suddenly felt new again. But outside, Ryder stood by his bike, staring down the empty road that led west out of Iron Springs. The sound of that black Norton still echoed faintly in his mind, like the last note of a song that didn't want to end. Lexi came up beside him, tightening her gloves. "You're thinking what I'm thinking, aren't you?" Ryder nodded slowly. "We can't just let him ride off without a word. The man changed everything for Walter and for us. I didn't even thank him properly." Tango leaned against his bike, chewing on a toothpick. "You're not serious. Guy probably wants to be left alone." He didn't fix that truck or walk away from the praise because he wanted attention, but that doesn't mean we let him disappear like a ghost. Lexi swung her leg over her Harley, revving it to life. "Then what are we waiting for?" The rest of the crew exchanged glances. A few grumbled under their breath, but one by one they followed Ryder's lead, engines roaring to life until the quiet town trembled again under the sound. The veterans inside peeked through the windows as the Iron Hawks rolled out, kicking up dust and determination in their wake. They rode hard through the winding two-lane highway, the morning wind whipping against their jackets. The hills fell away to open plains, wide and endless under a pale sky. For the first time in a long while, their ride wasn't about running from anything. It was about catching up to something good before it disappeared. They stopped at a small gas station on the edge of the highway, its neon sign flickering against the wind. A single attendant stood outside, wiping the windshield of a pickup. Ryder pulled in first, calling out, "Hey brother, you see a guy pass through here? Black Norton bike, riding alone?" The attendant grinned. "Sure did. Came through about 20 minutes ago. Quiet fella, real polite, paid cash. Headed west, toward the cliffs. Said something about catching the view before the day got too hot." Lexi looked at Ryder, eyes bright with determination. "That's him." Ryder nodded. "Then, let's move." They peeled back onto the road, the engines rising like thunder again. The miles blurred under their wheels as they chased the fading horizon. The wind howled against their helmets, and every turn of the throttle carried a mix of excitement and gratitude. Lexi shouted over the roar, "Why do you think he did it all? The repairs, the note, the flag he didn't owe us a thing?" Ryder's voice came back strong against the wind. "Because some people don't need a reason to do what's right. They just do." The road curved ahead toward the cliffs, where the land dropped away into a sea of golden plains stretching as far as the eye could see. The Iron Hawks roared up the last stretch of road, the cliffs rising in the distance like ancient guardians overlooking the open land. The wind grew stronger as they climbed higher, the scent of pine mixing with dry air and dust. When they reached the crest, the world seemed to open up endless plains stretching toward the horizon, glowing gold under the afternoon sun. And there he was. Keanu's Black Norton was parked near the edge of the overlook, its chrome glinting in the light. He stood beside it, helmet in hand, gazing out over the landscape like a man listening to something only he could hear. The wind tugged at his jacket and the ends of his hair, but he didn't move. He looked completely at peace. Ryder cut his engine first. The others followed one by one until the roar died into stillness, replaced by the whisper of the breeze and the clicking of cooling engines. "Hey man," Ryder called, his voice carrying across the open air. "You didn't even say goodbye." Keanu turned slowly, that familiar calm smile tugging at his lips. "Didn't want to make a scene," he said. "You all had your moment." Lexi swung off her bike, shaking her head. "You can't just fix someone's life and ride off like that. You know that's not how normal people work, right?" Keanu chuckled softly. "I never said I was normal." Tango walked up behind them, grinning. "Brother, I've seen a lot of things on the road, but you might be the first man I've met who helps strangers like it's just another day." Keanu leaned back against his bike. "You helped too. That's what matters. Ryder stepped forward, holding out his hand. For what it's worth, we're in your debt. Walter can't stop talking about you. None of us can, really. Keanu looked at the outstretched hand, then took it firmly. You don't owe me anything. You stopped when it mattered. That says more than words ever could. The handshake lingered a moment longer than expected two men who'd lived enough life to understand the value of silence. Lexi crossed her arms, smiling softly. So what now? You heading west to disappear again? Keanu looked back toward the horizon. Maybe just heading forward. There's always someone out there who needs a hand. Ryder nodded. Then I guess we'll keep an eye on the same road. Keanu smiled at that, sliding his helmet back on. Sounds like a good plan. The wind picked up as he swung a leg over his bike. The sun hit his visor, turning it into a mirror that reflected the whole crew, the Iron Hawks standing together in quiet respect. He started the engine, the familiar low rumble filling the air again. Take care of each other, he said. That's the real ride. Ryder raised a hand in salute. You too, brother. Keep the rubber side down. Keanu revved the throttle once, then turned toward the long road that wound down the cliffs. The sound of his engine faded into the wind until it became one, with it leaving behind only the echo of his words and the feeling that they had just met someone rare. Lexi broke the silence first. So, that really was him. Ryder smiled faintly. Yeah, and I don't think we'll ever meet another like him. The Iron Hawk stood for a long moment, watching the horizon where the Black Norton vanished into the distance, before Ryder finally said, Let's ride. And together, they turned back toward the open road. The engines roaring once more, chasing the same sun that Keanu was now riding into. The wind whipped across the overlook as the sun climbed higher, painting the plains below in shades of gold and pale green. Keanu stood by his Black Norton, adjusting his gloves, ready to continue west. But before he could mount the bike again, the Iron Hawks approached in a slow formation, engines rumbling low. The sound rolled like thunder behind him until one by one, the engines cut off, leaving only the whistle of the wind. Ryder stepped forward first. His boots crunched on the gravel as he called out, Hold up, man. You leaving without saying who you really are? Keanu turned toward them slowly, the sun lighting the edges of his face. He reached up, removed his helmet, and the group froze. The quiet stranger who had been riding among them wasn't just another traveler. His familiar calm eyes, that humble smile, the face they'd all seen before it was Keanu Reeves himself. Tango was the first to break the silence. You're him. No way. You're freaking Keanu Reeves. Keanu chuckled lightly, sliding the helmet under his arm. Last I checked, I'm just a guy heading the same direction. Lexi blinked in disbelief. Man, we've been sitting around a fire talking about redemption and second chances with John Wick himself? Keanu smiled modestly. Keanu's fine. Ryder took a step closer, shaking his head. You didn't have to do all that, brother. The repairs, the call. To Peterson, paying for Walter's truck, you didn't owe him a thing. Keanu looked out toward the horizon for a moment before answering. Neither did you, but you stopped anyway. That's what makes it mean something. The breeze lifted a strand of hair across his face, and he tucked it back with a quiet grace. When I saw you guys pull over for Walter, I recognized something real. You didn't do it for attention. You did it because it was right. Ryder nodded slowly. Guess we just got tired of being seen as the bad guys. Keanu met his eyes. Then stop seeing yourselves that way. You can't change how people remember you, but you can change what they'll remember next. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The only sound was the rustle of the flag on Ryder's bike and the distant echo of the wind sweeping through the valley below. Lexi smiled faintly, still shaking her head in awe. Can't believe we didn't recognize you sooner. Keanu grinned. That's probably for the best. I get fewer questions when people think I'm just another road bum. Tango laughed, the tension finally breaking. Man, I told you he looked familiar, Ryder. You said he was just quiet. Ryder smirked. He was quiet, too quiet for a Hollywood guy. Keanu laughed softly. Silence is a good friend when you're trying to listen. The group fell into an easy quiet again. The fame didn't matter anymore. What stood between them wasn't awe, It was respect. The kind that wasn't forged by movies or headlines, but by actions that didn't need an audience. The wind carried a deep, steady rhythm as the group stood in silence, trying to process what had just unfolded. The desert stretched out behind Keanu, vast and timeless, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Ryder finally broke the quiet, his voice low but steady. "You know, most people in your position would have turned that whole moment into a photo op, but you just walked away, like it was nothing." Keanu gave a small, knowing smile. "It wasn't nothing. It just wasn't mine to take credit for." Lexi tilted her head, studying him. "You really live what you preach, don't you?" He looked at her with that calm sincerity they'd all come to recognize. "I try to. The world doesn't need more noise, it needs examples. Even small ones." Tango folded his arms. "Guess we're not the only ones who had something to prove." Keanu nodded gently. "Maybe we all do. The difference is how we prove it." Ryder looked out toward the road below. "Man, you could have told us who you were from the start." Keanu shrugged lightly. "Would it have changed what you did?" Ryder thought for a moment, then smiled. "No, we still would have helped Walter." "Exactly," Keanu said. "And that's why it mattered. You didn't help because someone famous was watching. You helped because that's who you decided to be now." For a moment, no one could speak. It was one of those rare silences that didn't feel empty but full of understanding, of gratitude, of quiet purpose. Lexi stepped forward, her voice softer now. "You know, people always say bikers like us don't belong anywhere. But after meeting you, I'm starting to think we belong exactly where we stopped to help." Keanu's eyes softened. "That's the only kind of belonging that counts," Tango laughed. "Well, if this doesn't make us the good guys, I don't know what will." Keanu grinned. "You already were. The world just hadn't caught up yet." Ryder turned to the group, shaking his head with a faint laugh. "Man, this whole time we thought we were helping an old vet. Turns out we got a lesson from Keanu Reeves himself." Keanu raised a hand. "Not a lesson, just a reminder. The world's rough enough without us forgetting how to be decent." The wind blew stronger then, lifting the dust around their boots. The moment felt weightless, suspended between reality and reflection. Ryder offered his hand again, this time not out of gratitude, but brotherhood. "You ever ride with us again? You've got a place in the Iron Hawks." Keanu clasped his hand firmly. "I think I already do." They laughed together, the kind of laughter that felt clean, like the road ahead had somehow gotten a little clearer. Keanu pulled on his helmet, the sunlight gleaming across the visor. "Keep doing what you're doing," he said. "People will follow your lead even if they never know your names." Ryder nodded. "We'll hold you to that, brother." The sound of engines rose again as Keanu started his bike. He gave one last nod to the group before turning back toward the open highway. As he rode away, the Iron Hawks stood watching, the dust swirling around their boots. None of them said a word. They didn't need to. The respect between them had been sealed wordless, timeless, and forged not by fame or fortune, but by the shared decency of those who still believed in doing good on the open road. The afternoon sun hung low, spilling long shadows across the open highway. The heat shimmered on the blacktop as the Iron Hawks gathered their bikes at the base of the overlook, engines idling in deep, rhythmic unison. Keanu's Black Norton rumbled quietly beside them, the sound blending perfectly with their collective roar. Different machines, same heartbeat. Ryder pulled up next to him, grinning through his dark visor. "You sure you want to roll with a bunch of reformed misfits?" Keanu laughed under his breath. "I've been around movie sets my whole life. Trust me, I've seen worse." Lexi revved her Harley, smirking. "Then let's give the world a picture they'll never forget." The group took off together, wheels spitting dust as they merged onto the open highway. The road stretched straight ahead, wide and endless beneath the pale blue sky. From a distance, they looked like an army, a wall of chrome and leather cutting through the desert wind. For miles they rode in formation. Keanu at the center, Ryder just ahead, Lexi to his right, Tango and the others flanking behind. Their jackets flapped like black banners against the sun. The rhythm of engines filled the air, each rev a reminder that redemption wasn't just a word, it was motion, it was noise, it was life. At one point, they passed a roadside diner, a place with faded paint and a neon open sign flickering against the window. A few customers stood outside, shielding their eyes as the convoy thundered past. One man pointed, squinting at the rider in the middle. "Wait a second," he said, voice rising with disbelief. "That's Keanu Reeves." Phones came out, cameras lifted, but Keanu never broke formation. He kept his gaze forward, focused on the horizon. To him, this wasn't about spectacle. It was about the road, the freedom of it, the unity it carried. Lexi looked over mid-ride, her voice carrying through the comlink in her helmet. "You know you just broke the internet, right?" Keanu smiled behind his visor. "If they talk about this, make sure they talk about all of you too." Ryder's voice came through next. "Don't worry, brother. They'll remember." They hit a long stretch where the wind grew fierce, the road curving gently around a low canyon. Keanu leaned into the turn effortlessly, his bike gliding smooth beside Ryder's. For a moment, it felt less like a ride and more like a statement that even in a divided world, people could still move together in rhythm, no matter where they came from. The convoy slowed as they reached a crossroads up ahead, a long intersection marked by a single stop sign and a wide-open view of the plains. Keanu eased off the throttle, pulling alongside Ryder. The bikes rolled to a stop at the crossroads, the sound of engines settling into a low growl. The air smelled like hot rubber and dust. The horizon stretched endlessly in every direction, one road leading west into the sun, another cutting north toward the mountains. Ryder removed his helmet, his hair matted with sweat and wind. "Guess this is where we split," he said. Keanu nodded, killing his engine. The sudden silence felt heavy after miles of roaring thunder. "Yeah," he said softly, "you've got your road. I've got mine." Lexi pulled up beside them, resting her arm on the handlebar. "You sure you don't want to ride with us a little longer?" "I think the Ironhawks could use a celebrity patch." Keanu smiled. "You don't need one. You've already got what matters: loyalty, heart, and a reason to ride." Tango snorted. "That's a better speech than Ryder's ever given." Ryder chuckled. "He's got a few more years of practice than me." He turned serious then, glancing over at Keanu. "You know, we spent years trying to make people see we're not what they think we are. But today, riding next to you, it's the first time I believed it myself." Keanu looked at him quietly for a moment. "That's all it takes. One moment to remind yourself who you really are." The wind blew through, lifting the dust around their boots. Somewhere far off, a hawk cried over the plains. Lexi leaned forward, her voice softening. "You didn't have to do what you did for Walter, or for us, but you did. Why?" Keanu paused, gazing down the empty road ahead. "Because once, a stranger stopped for me too," he said. "I learned something that day. We're all travelers on someone else's road. Sometimes it's your turn to lift someone back up." Ryder nodded slowly. "That's one hell of a way to look at it." Keanu looked back at the group, his voice low but strong. "Keep doing what you're doing. The world needs people like you, the kind who don't just ride for themselves, the kind who stop." The Ironhawks went quiet. Even Tango, usually full of jokes, had nothing to say. The moment hung there real, unscripted, and sacred in its simplicity. "You too, brother. You ever need a place to stop? The Hawks'll have a seat waiting." Keanu took his hand firmly. "I'll hold you to that." Lexi grinned. "Don't tempt us. We might show up on a movie set." Keanu laughed. "If you do, make sure you bring the noise." He slid his helmet back on and started the Norton. The deep rumble filled the air again, blending with the growl of the Harley engines beside him. For a moment, they all just sat there. A man who carried the weight of fame like a shadow, and a group of outlaws trying to outrun theirs. Different stories, same heart. Then, with a final salute, Keanu twisted the throttle and pulled onto the westbound road. The Ironhawks followed for a few hundred yards, their bikes forming a perfect line beside his. At the fork, Keanu raised his hand high. Ryder and the crew lifted theirs in return, a silent exchange of trust, gratitude, and respect that didn't need words. The Norton surged ahead, its engine echoing down the empty highway until it blended with the horizon. The Hawk slowed, turning north toward the hills. Ryder looked back once, the sun catching his visor. "You think he'll remember us?" Lexi smiled beneath her helmet. "Doesn't matter. We'll remember him." And as they disappeared down their own road, the dust hung in the air behind them, shimmering in the dying light, marking the place where two paths had crossed, and where brotherhood had found its home on the open road. The sun was barely up when the Iron Hawks rolled once more down the long road toward Iron Springs. The desert air felt cooler now, touched by the whisper of fall. It had been a few weeks since their ride with Keanu, weeks that had left a mark none of them could quite put into words. Ryder led the pack, his jacket freshly stitched with a small patch above the old club emblem. It read simply, "Ride with honor." As they approached the town, the familiar landmarks came into view: the faded diner, the empty hardware store, and finally, the American Legion Hall, standing proud despite its age. But this time, something was different. The sound of their engines didn't bring curtains twitching or suspicious eyes. Instead, a few townsfolk stepped onto their porches, waving. Lexi smiled behind her visor. "Would you look at that? Guess word travels faster than engines." Ryder grinned. "That's a first for us." They pulled up in front of the Legion Hall, where Walter Briggs stood waiting on the steps, leaning on his cane but smiling wide. He wore the same flag-embroidered hat, the brim darkened with sun and sweat. "Well, if it isn't my favorite band of troublemakers," he said, laughing as Ryder climbed off his bike. Ryder clasped his hand warmly. "You look good, old man," Walter chuckled. "Haven't felt this good in years. Must be the company." Behind the Hawks' bikes was a small trailer filled with crates and boxes, food supplies, tools, and a stack of carefully packed motorcycle parts gleamed under the morning light. Lexi opened the latch and began unloading, while Tango and two others followed. Walter blinked, stunned. "What in the world is all this?" Ryder rested his arm on the trailer. "A donation. Figured your club could use a little help. Food for the hall, parts for the veterans who still ride. And," he motioned to a long, narrow bundle wrapped in cloth. "Something special." Lexi stepped forward and unwrapped it slowly, revealing a tall stainless steel flagpole, polished to a mirror shine. Walter's eyes welled up instantly. "You didn't have to do all this." Ryder's tone was gentle. "Neither did you that day on the road. But you gave us something we didn't even know we needed, a reason to be proud of who we are." The old veteran wiped his eyes, his hands trembling as he ran a palm along the smooth metal. "You boys and girls are something else. Used to be folks crossed the street when they saw your patches. Now they're crossing the street just to shake your hands." Lexi smiled softly. "Maybe the world just needed a better reason to believe in us." Walter nodded, voice low. "Or maybe you gave them one." He turned toward the hall, calling through the open door. "Tom, get everyone out here. You won't believe who just rolled in." The door to the Legion Hall creaked open, and soon a few familiar faces stepped out: Tom, Hank, and the other old veterans who had watched the Iron Hawks walk in weeks earlier with wary eyes. This time, those same eyes carried nothing but warmth. Tom squinted at the sight of the trailer. "You folks bringing half a warehouse with you?" Ryder laughed. "Just trying to return the favor." Hank, his voice raspy but kind, said, "We heard about what you did for Walter. The whole town's been talking. You boys put Iron Springs back on the map." Lexi smiled. "We didn't do it for attention. We just thought you deserved a little support." The veterans gathered around the trailer, helping unload supplies with surprising energy. Boxes were carried into the hall, laughter echoing as old soldiers and bikers worked side by side. It was a sight nobody in that small town would have imagined. A month earlier, leather vests and American Legion caps in the same photo, all for the same cause. Walter supervised from the steps, watching with pride. "You know," he said, "I used to think the road took everything from me. My youth, my son, even my hope. But you brought it back." Ryder shook his head. Nah, Walter. You had it the whole time. You just needed a tune-up. That earned a deep, hearty laugh from everyone around. Even Tom, usually stoic, cracked a grin. When the last box was brought in, Walter motioned them toward the wall near the podium. Got something I want to show you. Inside, the Legion Hall felt brighter than before. The old photos had been dusted, the coffee smelled fresh, and sunlight poured through the cleaned windows. On one wall hung a simple wooden frame inside it, the folded piece of paper that had changed everything. Keanu's note: freedom isn't just riding on the road, it's helping others get up. Beneath it, a small plaque had been mounted. The engraving read, "In honor of those who still stop to help. Donated by the Iron Hawks." Walter stood beside it, his hand resting gently on the frame. I figured these words shouldn't just sit in my truck. They belong here, where folks can see what kindness looks like when it's done right. Lexi's eyes shimmered. "He really wrote that, huh?" Walter nodded. "And you lived it." The room went silent again, filled with the kind of quiet that speaks louder than noise. Ryder looked at the note, then at Walter. He said he was just a guy, going in the same direction. Guess he meant it. Walter smiled softly. Maybe so. But sometimes the right person riding in your direction is all it takes to change where you're headed. The group fell into a thoughtful hush. The sunbeam from the window hit the frame just right, making the ink shimmer faintly like fresh silver. Tom broke the moment first. "How about we raise that new flag, huh? This place could use a bit of color again." Outside, they worked together to install the new flagpole in front of the hall. The sound of wrenches, laughter, and wind mixed together as the Iron Hawks and veterans hoisted the American flag high into the bright blue sky. As the cloth caught the wind and began to wave, Walter stepped back, tears glistening in his eyes. "You hear that?" he said softly. "That's what freedom sounds like." Ryder put a hand on his shoulder. "No, Walter. That's what gratitude sounds like." The old man smiled through his tears. "Guess they're the same thing." When the flag reached the top and unfurled fully, everyone clapped. Not just for the flag, but for the moment, for the second chances, for the unity, and for the people who still believed in stopping to help. And inside the Legion Hall, Keanu's note hung quietly on the wall, a reminder that heroes weren't born in headlines, but found on the road, one act of kindness at a time. It started small, a few photos snapped by locals outside the Legion Hall, posted on social media with simple captions like "Bikers help old veteran in Iron Springs" and "Keanu Reeves spotted riding with motorcycle club." Within hours, those posts spread like wildfire. By the next morning, the story had found its way onto every major news outlet in the country. Headlines filled the internet. "Bikers help stranded veteran." "Joined by Keanu Reeves in heartwarming ride." And "The Iron Hawks. From outlaws to heroes." News anchors smiled as they told the story on morning shows. The footage of Walter standing beside the newly raised flagpole, surrounded by veterans and bikers, played on repeat, set to soft piano music. For once, the world wasn't talking about conflict or division. It was talking about unity, about the power of strangers to lift one another up. In Los Angeles, a reporter caught up with Keanu outside a small studio lot, hoping for a quote. "Mr. Reeves," she asked, holding out her microphone. "People are calling this one of the most uplifting stories of the year. How does it feel to be part of something so inspiring?" Keanu paused, his hands in his jacket pockets, that calm, thoughtful look on his face. "It wasn't my story," he said simply. "It was theirs." The clip aired that evening, and the internet lit up even more. Fans shared his response with captions like, "That's why we love him," and "Real-life hero, not just on screen." Meanwhile, the Iron Hawks found their world turning upside down. Ryder's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Local news wanted interviews. Veteran organizations invited them to join memorial rides. Motorcycle groups across the state sent messages of respect. Even the mayor of a nearby city invited them to lead a charity convoy for disabled veterans. Ryder tried to take it all in stride, though he couldn't hide his pride. "Guess we're finally making headlines for the right reasons," he said one night at their clubhouse. Tango laughed. Yeah, man, who'd have thought? The Iron Hawks getting thanked by people instead of chased by them. Lexi rolled her eyes with a smile. Don't get too used to it, boys. Fame fades fast. But this, what we did, that stays. Ryder nodded. She's right. This isn't about being known. It's about being remembered for the right reasons. On one wall of their clubhouse, someone had printed and framed the same line from Keanu's note. Beneath it hung photos from the ride Walter with the flag, the convoy on Route 66, and a wide shot of Keanu riding alongside them. They didn't treat it like a shrine. They treated it like a compass. From that day on, the Iron Hawks made a promise. Every time they hit the road, they'd carry that same spirit of helping others. No fights, no chaos, no reputation to prove. Just kindness in motion. And soon enough, that promise began to shape everything they did. Within a week, the Iron Hawks became a symbol of redemption across the country. Veteran organizations shared their story as proof that people could change, that second chances were real. Local schools even used the news clip in civics classes, teaching students about compassion on the open road. Ryder couldn't believe how far it had gone. We've been called a lot of things, he said, shaking his head as he watched a news segment play on the clubhouse TV. But heroes? That's a first. Lexi smirked. Took you long enough to earn the title. The anchor on screen spoke with warmth. In a world often divided, a group of bikers and a Hollywood actor reminded us that decency still lives on America's highways. The Iron Hawks and Keanu Reeves may have come together by chance, but what they created was something rare, a story of respect, unity, and redemption. Ryder muted the TV and turned to his crew. We didn't set out to make a statement. We just stopped for a man who needed a hand. But maybe that's the statement itself. The others nodded. Tango leaned back, kicking his boots onto a stool. Man, who knew helping one old vet would turn us into a movement? Lexi grinned. It's not a movement. It's a reminder that kindness still rides the same roads we do. Outside, the late afternoon sun washed the bikes in gold. Ryder walked out to the porch, staring at the row of Harleys gleaming in the light. For the first time in years, he didn't just see machines, he saw purpose. His phone buzzed again, another message, this one from the State Veteran Affairs Office. They were inviting the Iron Hawks to lead a statewide charity ride honoring veterans in small towns like Iron Springs. He looked at the message for a long time before showing it to Lexi. Looks like we've got another road ahead, she smiled. Then we better make sure it's a good one. A few hundred miles away, Keanu Reeves sat in a quiet diner off the highway, sipping coffee alone. A small TV in the corner replayed footage of the Iron Hawks' latest event. The same group of riders now leading a charity convoy, flags waving behind them. He watched quietly, a soft smile forming on his face. The waitress walked by and noticed. You know, you kind of look like that movie star they're talking about, she joked. Keanu chuckled. People tell me that sometimes. She poured him another cup of coffee. He seems like a good man. Keanu looked toward the screen again. He tries. Outside, his black Norton was parked by the window, its engine cooled but ready. He finished his coffee, left a generous tip, and stood to leave. As he stepped into the fading sunlight, the wind caught the edge of his jacket, and the faint sound of motorcycles echoed far off down the road. He smiled to himself, swung a leg over the bike, and started the engine. Some stories didn't need retelling, only continuation. And as Keanu rode west again, the set of headlines, the noise, and the fame faded behind him. What stayed was the echo of kindness carried forward by the Iron Hawks and everyone else who believed that real freedom would always begin with helping someone else get up. Spring arrived with the sound of engines. Across the country, riders gathered for what they called the Freedom Ride, a coast-to-coast journey organized by the Iron Hawks to honor veterans and raise funds for soldiers in need. It started as a small idea from Ryder one winter night. What if we take what Keanu taught us and give it back to everyone? Within weeks, the plan spread like wildfire through biker circles, veteran networks, and online forums. By the time the first engines revved in California, there were thousands of participants ready to roll. At dawn, the parking lot of the Santa Monica Pier was a sea of chrome and leather. Veterans in patched jackets stood beside truckers, teachers, and office workers who had taken time off just to ride. Some carried American flags. Others had photos of loved ones pinned to their bikes. It wasn't about image, it was about belonging. Ryder stood at the front of the line beside Lexi, both wearing freshly cleaned Iron Hawks colors. Their old patches were faded, but proud. "Hard to believe this all started with one broken-down truck," Lexi said, looking out over the crowd. Ryder smiled. "One good deed has a way of rolling farther than the tires that started it." Tango walked by, holding a clipboard and grinning. "Looks like we've got registrations from 32 states, even a few from Canada." Walter Briggs was there too, standing tall in front of the Legion banner. The same flag he'd carried that night in the desert now flew above the starting line, its colors bright against the blue sky. "You ready to make some noise?" he shouted. The crowd erupted with cheers and the roar of engines that could be felt in the chest. When the flag dropped, the Freedom Ride began, a wave of steel and sound rolling east across America. Highways turned into rivers of motion. Small towns stopped to watch as hundreds of bikes passed by in neat formation. Kids stood on sidewalks waving flags. Veterans saluted from porches, and reporters trailed behind, capturing the spectacle. Every few miles, a new group joined in. Firemen, farmers, factory workers, all drawn by the message the Iron Hawks had started. Freedom isn't selfish, it's shared. As the convoy reached Arizona, the sun began to fall low over the desert. Dust rose behind the riders, painting the air gold. Ryder looked in his side mirror at the endless line of motorcycles stretching behind him and felt something tighten in his throat. "This is what hope sounds like," he said quietly into his radio. Lexi's voice came through the headset. "It's more than hope, it's proof." A few miles ahead, on a rise overlooking the plains, a lone black motorcycle waited beside the road, sleek, familiar, timeless. Ryder slowed, recognizing it immediately. The others followed his lead. As they approached, the rider slid on his helmet and started the engine. The Norton's deep growl joined the chorus, merging into the convoy like it had always belonged. As the black Norton merged into the line, a quiet ripple passed through the riders. Helmets turned. Hands rose in silent acknowledgement. Nobody shouted his name or pointed they didn't need to. Everyone knew. Keanu was back. Ryder's voice came through the radio, steady but warm. "Welcome home, brother." The only reply was a simple nod from Keanu as he fell into formation beside him. The wind whipped against their jackets, the engines blending into a single, thunderous harmony. The convoy stretched for miles. Veterans with flags tied to their bikes. Truckers blaring their horns in rhythm. Everyday Americans, riding for something bigger than themselves. Lexi rode up on the other side of Keanu, glancing at him through her visor. "Didn't think you'd show," she said over the radio. Keanu's laughter came soft and genuine. "Couldn't let you have all the fun." The road opened wide as they crossed into New Mexico, sunlight blazing across the horizon. Towns appeared and disappeared, each one lining the roads with handmade signs. "Thank you, veterans. Ride safe. We believe in you." Children waved from pickup beds, and old men stood saluting as the riders thundered past. At every stop, the Iron Hawks were met with gratitude handshakes, hugs, and stories. People who'd never met before talked like family. The Freedom Ride had become something beyond a cause. It was a living reminder that decency still mattered, that unity could travel farther than fame. Somewhere near Amarillo, they stopped at a gas station that looked straight out of another decade. Keanu leaned against his bike, sipping water as Ryder walked over. "Didn't think we'd see you again," Ryder said. Keanu looked up with a quiet smile. "I didn't plan to, but I figured this road still had something to say." Ryder nodded, glancing at the endless line of bikes filling the parking lot. "You started this, you know. Without you, there wouldn't be a Freedom Ride." Keanu shook his head. "You started it the moment you stopped for Walter. I just happened to be going the same direction." Ryder grinned. "Still saying that, huh?" Keanu smirked. Still true. They stood there for a moment, the noise of hundreds of engines idling around them like the heartbeat of a nation that had rediscovered its kindness. When they set off again, the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in orange and crimson. The convoy rode into it, shadows stretching long behind them. Keanu led for a few miles, his black Norton slicing through the wind, the flag from Walter's Legion Hall fluttering high in the distance behind him. Somewhere near the Kansas border, he raised his hand and signaled the group to keep going. Then, without fanfare, he pulled to the side of the road. Ryder slowed, watching as Keanu stopped near a lone oak tree by the highway. He turned back once, lifting his hand in farewell, a simple gesture, but it carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. Ryder saluted in return. "Ride safe, brother." Keanu nodded, then turned his bike toward the fading sun. As he disappeared over the horizon, the rest of the convoy kept riding their engines roaring like one voice across the heart of America. It was no longer about one man, one club, or one act of kindness. It was about the road that connected them all. The shared journey, the brotherhood, and the belief that true freedom is never about how far you ride, but how many people you help up along the way. 1 year later, the town of Iron Springs looked different. The main street, once quiet and worn, now carried the steady hum of motorcycles and laughter. The old Legion Hall had been repaired, its bricks scrubbed clean, its flagpole gleaming under the sun. A new sign hung proudly over the entrance. Iron Hawks Veterans Fund, Training, Repair, Brotherhood. People came from miles around for the grand opening of the new workshop that the Iron Hawks had built, a space where veterans could learn motorcycle maintenance, earn steady pay, and find purpose again. It stood beside the Legion Hall, with wide open doors and the smell of new paint mixed with motor oil. Ryder stood at the center, his arms folded, taking it all in. "Hard to believe this used to be a forgotten town," he said quietly. "Now it's where second chances begin." Lexi smiled beside him. "You think Keanu ever imagined this would happen?" Ryder shook his head. "He didn't have to imagine it. He probably knew it would." The crowd gathered as Walter Briggs stepped up to the red ribbon strung across the front doors. His posture was slower these days, but his spirit burned just as bright. The American flag from his son's service now flew high above the workshop, snapping proudly in the breeze. Reporters and townsfolk lined the sidewalks. The Iron Hawks, dressed in their best leathers, stood shoulder to shoulder with veterans wearing faded uniforms. It was a sight of unity that would have seemed impossible just a year before. Tom from the Legion called out, "All right, Walter, you started this road. You should be the one to cut it." Walter lifted the scissors with both hands. "I didn't start anything," he said with a smile. "I just broke down on the side of the road. The rest was done by people who refused to keep driving." The crowd applauded as the ribbon fell. The sound of clapping mixed with the growl of engines revving in celebration. Walter laughed, the kind of deep, full laugh that felt like freedom itself. Inside, the workshop gleamed. Rows of tool benches lined the walls, each station stocked and labeled. Banners hung above the work area. Learn, build, belong. A few veterans were already inside, polishing chrome and tuning engines. Their smiles said more than any speech ever could. Lexi wiped her hands on her jeans and whispered, "Feels like we built something that'll outlive us." Ryder nodded, watching Walter shake hands with the new trainees. "That's the goal." As the crowd settled into conversations and photos, a delivery truck pulled up to the curb. The driver, a young man in a plain cap, hopped out carrying a large wooden box. "Delivery for the Iron Hawks Veterans Fund," he called. "No sender listed." Ryder raised a brow. "We weren't expecting anything." The driver shrugged. "Just told to bring it here today." Lexi stepped forward. "Let's open it." The crowd gathered as Ryder carefully pried open the wooden crate. The lid came off with a soft creak, revealing layers of cloth wrapped around polished metal. When he pulled back the cover, the sunlight caught the contents and glinted across the surface a full set of precision mechanics tools, each engraved with the same simple phrase on the handle: "Keep riding forward." For a long moment, nobody spoke. The veterans stared, the Iron Hawks stood frozen, and Walter stepped closer, his eyes wide. "Who "Who sent this?" he asked quietly. The driver checked his clipboard. No sender name. Just a note. He handed Ryder a small envelope. Inside was a folded card written in clean, familiar handwriting. "For those who still build more than they break, keep riding forward. A fellow traveler." Lexi's breath caught in her throat. She pressed a hand to her mouth as the truth settled in. "It's him," she whispered. Ryder nodded slowly, his throat tightening. "Yeah," he said. "He's still watching the road." Walter smiled softly, tears brimming in his eyes. He never wanted the spotlight. He just wanted to make sure the light kept moving. The veterans and bikers stood in reverent silence. Even the wind seemed to pause. Then Walter stepped up to the toolbox and ran a trembling hand over the engravings. "These tools," he said quietly. "They're more than metal. They're a message." Lexi nodded, her voice hushed. "That kindness doesn't stop when you do." Ryder smiled faintly. Or maybe it just changes gears. Laughter rippled through the group, warm and genuine. The tension eased, replaced by that same feeling they'd all shared on the highway connection without words. Walter turned to the men and women inside the shop. "You know, I used to think the road was something you traveled until it ended," he said. "But now I see it's not a line you follow. It's something you pass on." He looked up at the flag fluttering above them, then back at the plaque on the wall bearing Keanu's words. "Freedom isn't just riding on the road, it's helping others get up." "Let's make sure everyone who walks in here understands that," Walter said. The veterans cheered softly, nodding to one another. Someone hung the new set of tools on the front wall, their steel gleaming like silver under the workshop lights. The engraving caught the sunbeam from the window, and for a moment, it looked almost alive. Outside, the roar of bikes echoed again as the Iron Hawks revved their engines, not to leave, just to honor the sound that started it all. The deep, steady rhythm filled the street, vibrating through the ground and into every heart that had gathered. Lexi turned to Ryder, brushing a tear from her cheek. "You think we'll ever see him again?" Ryder looked out toward the open highway stretching beyond the hills. "Maybe not," he said softly. "But he's out there somewhere. As long as there's a road, he'll be riding it." Walter stepped beside them, smiling through his tears. "Then let's make sure it's a good one." The engines thundered once more, not in farewell but in tribute, a sound of brotherhood, legacy, and the promise that no act of kindness ever truly ends. And above them, the flag rippled proudly in the wind, shining beneath the same sky where a lone rider was still moving forward. The day had begun the way all good days do in Iron Springs, with the sound of engines echoing faintly through the hills. Walter Briggs sat on the tailgate of his old blue truck, the same one that had once stranded him on the side of Route 66. The sun was warm against his back, the flag above the veterans' workshop snapping proudly in the wind. Around him, life moved with a rhythm that felt right. He sipped his coffee slowly, his eyes following a group of new riders pulling into town. They weren't the Iron Hawks, but he knew who they were. Young veterans, some still finding their way. All of them wearing patches stitched with the words, "Freedom Ride Brotherhood." Walter smiled, lifting 2 fingers to his brow in a casual salute. The bikers honked in return, raising their hands as they passed, the sound of their engines fading toward the horizon. It was a sound Walter had grown to love, not for the noise, but for what it meant. Motion, unity, a promise that no one had to travel their road alone anymore. He looked toward the workshop, where Ryder and Lexi were training a new batch of veterans on basic engine repair. The air smelled of oil and steel, and laughter carried out through the open doors. On the wall inside hung Keanu's note, framed now in glass and polished every morning before work began. Walter's eyes softened as he read the words again from a distance. Freedom isn't just riding on the road, it's helping others get up. He thought about the man who had written that the quiet stranger who had appeared one evening when everything seemed lost, and who had vanished just as quietly after changing the course of so many lives. Sometimes, late at night, Walter still thought he could hear the faint echo of that black Norton on the wind. He turned back toward the highway, where the road stretched long and endless through the desert. The light shimmered against the asphalt, turning it into something almost golden. He smiled to himself. "You're still out there somewhere, aren't you?" he murmured. A soft breeze swept past, carrying dust across the road. It felt like an answer. He looked up again, just in time to see another convoy appear in the distance. A new generation of riders, flags fluttering, faces hidden behind helmets. But the feeling was the same. They weren't riding for fame or pride. They were riding for purpose. Walter stood slowly, his hand resting on the tailgate for balance, and raised a salute once more. "Keep it rolling, boys," he whispered. "Keep riding forward." The sound of the engines grew louder for a moment, then faded again into the vast stretch of open country. The sun dipped lower, spilling amber light across the highway, the same road where everything had begun. The sun touched the horizon, turning the sky into a soft blaze of orange and gold. Walter leaned against his truck, hands resting on the cool metal, his gaze following the endless highway that stretched west. A trail of light shimmered across the asphalt, glowing faintly where the setting sun met the road. He thought about how far they had all come from that night on Route 66, when he'd been stranded and forgotten, to this moment where the same road now symbolized hope for thousands. One act of kindness had become a legacy, not through fame, but through the steady passing of compassion from one soul to another. Behind him, the veteran's workshop buzzed with quiet energy. Lexi laughed with one of the new trainees, showing him how to align a carburetor. Ryder was speaking with a reporter about expanding the Freedom ride to more states next year. The town of Iron Springs, once a dusty relic, now stood as a living monument to unity and decency. Walter took a slow breath, letting the sound of laughter and engines settle in his heart. "Freedom," he whispered. "It's not about getting somewhere. It's about helping someone else keep going." The words hung in the warm air, soft but sure. Down the road, a faint hum began to rise, a familiar sound, distant but distinct. Walter turned his head, a knowing smile forming on his face. Out past the last bend of the highway, a single black motorcycle appeared, gliding through the sunset. Its engine purred smoothly, steady and confident. For a moment, Walter could see the rider silhouetted against the glow, the lean posture, the calm precision, the quiet grace that could only belong to one man. He raised his hand in salute once more, not needing to speak. The black Norton passed by without slowing, the rider lifting his hand briefly in acknowledgement before disappearing into the horizon. Walter chuckled softly. "You really don't stop, do you?" The flag above the workshop waved high, catching the last rays of sunlight. Its shadow stretched long across the ground, reaching toward the highway where the sound of that lone engine faded into the distance. Then the wind shifted, carrying with it the faint echo of the words engraved on the workshop wall. "Freedom isn't just riding on the road, it's helping others get up." Walter smiled and looked back toward the crowd still working, laughing, living. "And we will," he said quietly. "Every single one of us." The camera would rise then, the image widening to show the highway stretching endlessly beneath the sunset. The black Norton became a speck against the glowing sky, its headlight flickering once before fading into gold. Over the final scene, a gentle reflection echoed calm, steady, filled with truth. Freedom isn't a destination. It's every moment we choose to lift someone else up. The wind carried the words across the desert, and the road glowed beneath the fading light, eternal, open, and waiting for the next traveler to pass by. Comment prompt 1. Have you ever met a stranger who changed your life? Comment prompt 2. What does freedom mean to you? Comment prompt 3. Would you join a ride like this to help others?